The Training and Work of an Initiate by Dion. Chapter 1. Foundations of Secret Knowledge. Since time immemorial, there has existed a pervasive conviction that certain individuals possess an erudition superior to that of others, and that, rather than disseminating specific facets of this wisdom to their contemporaries, as they were indeed inclined, nay, eager to do with other portions thereof, they guarded these secrets with sedulous care, or communicated them solely to a chosen few. These select recipients were either bound to inviolable secrecy or permitted to impart the knowledge in their turn only to those who were prepared to assume the same obligations and who were adjudged worthy to receive this great privilege. This tradition confronts us throughout the literary corpus of all nations across every epoch of their history, and we discover the generally held tenet that these arcane doctrines pertain to the inner nature of humanity and the universe, that aspect which is not observable by the direct action of the five physical senses, but for the perception of which the higher senses must be brought into play. Furthermore, it was commonly believed that a substantial portion of the secret teaching was concerned with the training of its students to employ these higher senses for the purpose of observation, much as the scholar of the physical sciences is disciplined in laboratory methodology and the utilization of the microscope. It was also maintained that occult science possessed a pragmatic dimension, and that a comprehension of its statutes bestowed dominion within the subtler realms, precisely as a knowledge of natural laws grants authority within the dense physical world. The recognition that this erudition was vigilantly protected by those who were its custodians was also universal, and throughout the ages, the identical justification for their circumspection was cited, that in the wrong hands, should this power be abused, it could engender grave calamitous consequences, for humanity possessed no right to employ it for personal ends, inasmuch as it was derived from the great author of the universe. The individuals who held it were trustees rather than proprietors, and were forbidden to appropriate this sacred power for their own uses lest they be found guilty of a transgression against their God and their fellow men. Indeed, we possess many traditions regarding the swift and severe retribution which befell those who thus offended, whether at the hands of their fellow initiates or of the higher powers against whom they had sinned. It was also maintained, however, that although this knowledge was shrouded in such secrecy that none could ascertain the location of its colleges, its libraries, or its scholars, should a man render himself a worthy recipient through his character and his life, he was, sooner or later, brought into contact with those competent to instruct him, at which point he also passed under the edict of secrecy. Literature and history bear universal testimony to the existence of this conviction among all peoples in all ages. Frequently has this belief been articulated, and just as frequently contradicted, only to be reaffirmed in each succeeding generation. That there can be no smoke without fire, and especially such a voluminous quantity of smoke as is observed here, will be acknowledged by the majority of people, and that this knowledge and methodology of training do actually exist as an organized system can be attested to by many who have encountered them through direct experience. As in antiquity, it is declared that it is requisite only for the student to fit himself for this enlightenment for the mysterious currents that play upon the universe to bring him into contact with those who can illuminate him, and many can vouch from personal experience that this premise is well founded. Whosoever formulates, even subconsciously, a desire to pursue the higher learning, shall be granted the opportunity to do so. Life after life, he will be afforded the discipline necessary to qualify him for its study, until finally, if notwithstanding all the rigorous tribulation to which he has been subjected, it has retained its position in his esteem as the singular objective of worth, this subconscious desire will emerge into consciousness, that which was amorphous will become articulate, and the individual will deliberately undertake the quest for the evidence of things not seen. What, then, Can a man undertake to so cultivate his mind as to be prepared for this higher wisdom when it shall come to him? What measures can he adopt by way of preliminary training, laboring as a solitary student, to fit himself for the reception of the knowledge he covets? The student who is not grounded in the rudiments cannot comprehend the advanced instruction. He who possesses no knowledge of arithmetic cannot grasp mathematics. Earn the means first. God surely will contrive use for our earning, remarked one who had himself trodden the path of knowledge. What course of action is open to the student who has not yet located his master? This question arises even though, many lives prior, his master must have located him, or he would not have attained the articulation of his aspiration. What can he do to maximize the utility of the material that lies at his disposal, so that, when the time of his training arrives, nothing remains undone that might have been accomplished beforehand, and his progress remains unimpeded by the absence of that necessary foundation of mental culture which was within his power to lay while he yet stood without the gate? Considerable time is squandered in teaching a man what he ought to have acquired in the schoolroom to enable him to grasp the import of the knowledge of which his initiation renders him free. It is true that, although glorious glimpses are captured by the intuition unaided by the intellect, much more is forfeited through sheer inability on the part of the student to comprehend the significance of his opportunity. Infinite phenomena can be perceived by spiritual intuition, but unless the intellect is fitted to cooperate, these insights can seldom be rendered of practical avail for the resolution of world problems. The mystic experiences moments of ecstatic emotion during which he scales great heights, but he is rarely able to bring back water from the wells of life for those he has left behind. It is only when each vehicle of consciousness in man exists in perfect correlation that the current of inspiration can flow through him and be translated into manifestation within the physical world in which we reside today. And while a man may learn great things and store them in his subconscious mind, it is only during the life in which he has learned to correlate his vehicles, thereby enabling him to bring the spiritual through into manifestation, that he can be of service to his fellow men. I would, therefore, exhort those who desire the higher knowledge to commence immediately the task of correlating their vehicles of consciousness, and particularly the mental one, so that when the higher wisdom is revealed to them, they may function as links between that which is above and their fellow men who yet stand upon a lower step of the great stair. I would urge them, should they require any spur to this endeavor, to recall how significant it would have been to them, when they themselves stood upon that selfsame step, had the assistance which it will be in their power to bestow been available. No exertion toward development is wasted, even if he who strives appears to lose sight of his goal and turns aside. It is the passage of many feet that widens the path for the multitude. We, in our era, shall never be compelled to face such trials as did the earlier initiates who forged the way for us. With regard to the practical consideration of the problems involved in this correlation of the vehicles of consciousness, it is imperative that the student conceive of his vehicles as distinct from himself, as instruments he employs to execute his labors. For this purpose, he sharpens and tends to them, and the more elevated the level upon which he can accustom himself to function, the superior the commencement he shall enjoy when his opportunity presents itself. While few illuminated individuals identify themselves merely with their physical bodies, a multitude reside within their emotional natures. Some possess the capacity to cogitate freely and coherently upon concrete subjects, yet only a select few can reason regarding the abstract, and an exceedingly rare few in a generation may experience the intuitions of the spiritual plane sufficiently to conceptualize in terms of inceptive and unmanifest thought. The initiates of the occult sciences are instructed to operate upon these distinct planes, to employ a terminology derived from the Orient, or, to articulate the same concept in Western parlance, to think according to these variegated modalities. Before one is sufficiently matured for a master's instruction, one must subjugate the physical and emotional levels independently, for up to this stage, the ordinary course of evolution permits development without extraneous intervention. We must render the body an absolute servant, bereft of the power to dictate its necessities. It is toward this objective that much of the extreme asceticism found in the yoga methods of India is directed. We of the West, however, do not employ these specific methodologies. It suffices that the body be rendered a voluntary collaborator rather than an abject slave. Redirect a man's desires toward a superior plane, and they will automatically elevate him thither, as a great initiate once posited. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The emotions must circulate unimpeded, without conflict or distortion, through the channels which nature has appointed for them, prior to their elevation to a higher plane. One cannot sublimate a pathology. The governance of the vital energies must be transferred from the domain of the desires to that of the will. Until this transfer is accomplished, there can be no consistent advancement in any direction, for the desires are elicited from without rather than directed from within, and they fluctuate in accordance with external stimuli. Let us now consider the cultivation of the mind in preparation for occult training. It must be recalled that there exist two distinct levels of the mind, the domain of concrete thought and the domain of abstract thought, and each of these requires cultivation. To an individual accustomed to thinking exclusively in concrete forms, the abstract appears devoid of significance upon the initial encounter. Its terms evoke no corresponding image within his consciousness, appearing as mere verbiage. Thus, it is necessary to habituate the mind to contemplate ideas rather than images. One of the most expedient methods to achieve this is the study of algebra, for therein the mind is compelled into an elementary mode of abstract thought and acquires the habit of considering proportions independent of material objects. From this juncture, one may proceed to the study of philosophy and metaphysics. An exemplary introduction to this discipline is Herbert Spencer's First Principles. With regard to the level of concrete thinking, we may accomplish much by way of preparation for higher training. The field before us is vast, so extensive that it would be difficult to extend our studies beyond the bounds of utility. The more expansive the sphere of our knowledge, the more numerous are our points of contact with the cosmos. The student who aspires to acquire knowledge directly from the cosmic mind proceeds in a manner analogous to a patient submitting to psychoanalysis, save that in this instance his attention is directed outwardly rather than inwardly. He commences with an idea within his own mind and pursues the chain of associated concepts until he reaches the root complex within the cosmic consciousness. Thus, it becomes patently evident that unless he possesses a starting point within his own consciousness, some precise idea intimately connected with the subject of study, he cannot begin to retract the links of the association chain and thereby draw the root complex into the field of his consciousness. The proficient occult student should possess a sound general knowledge of natural science, history, mathematics, and philosophy. Naturally, he cannot possess an exhaustive knowledge of all these subjects. However, he should comprehend their general contours, be familiar with the principles of all the sciences, and understand the methodologies of philosophy. Subsequently, when he acquires specialized knowledge, he will be able to perceive it in relation to the cosmic scheme of which it forms a part. Hence, he will comprehend it in a manner vastly different from the man who perceives it in isolation from its environment. The former has the living plant in the garden under his observation. The latter possesses the dried specimen in the herbarium. The relativity of knowledge has long been recognized, but the unity of knowledge has not yet been accorded its due justice. Although a man may excel solely through specialization, it is essential that he possess a background against which he can view his knowledge in perspective. For the occult student, there exists a further rationale for this framework of general information. In seeking to study by contacting the cosmic mind, he will often gain access to a mass of miscellaneous ideas, yet he will frequently overlook a piece of priceless information for lack of realization of its worth, or confounded by an unfamiliar terminology. He may fail to grasp the import of that which he is assimilating. The professors of a university are disinclined to ground students in the rudiments of knowledge that properly belong to the schoolroom. Likewise, when the student wishes to undertake the higher studies of esoteric science, he should arrive as completely equipped as exoteric studies can render him. Chapter 2. The Process of Initiation. The preponderant majority of our contemporaries are disposed to accept the world in the condition they discover it, and provided it treats them with a moderate degree of leniency, they remain satisfied. There are others, however, who interrogate what realities lie concealed behind the world as they perceive it, and until they ascertain the solution to that query, they endure that divine discontent which has perpetually impelled mankind to search beyond the horizon, toward the destination where mysterious paths descend. Furthermore, the majority of men are prone to assume the inevitability of suffering as an axiom. Unless brought into direct personal collision with some egregious instance, or finding themselves the victims, they proffer no objection. Conversely, distinct individuals appear so inextricably connected with the human race that they endure the collective anguish of humanity, unable to accept personal felicity or tranquility, while any fellow being remains in tribulation or pain. In former epochs, such natures were rare and widely dispersed. Yet in the present age, their numbers have multiplied, and no observer of the human condition can fail to be impressed by this deepening sense of solidarity with all existence, which is becoming increasingly prevalent among us. When we contemplate these two categories in relation to the enigma of evolution, we observe that they respond to it distinctively, yet the ultimate consequence of their respective attitudes is fundamentally identical. The former seeks to augment evolution through the rigorous application of science, thereby accelerating the gradual processes of nature. The latter endeavors to mitigate the suffering which the execution of nature's design entails. Nevertheless, both pursue knowledge so that they may more efficaciously serve their fellow men. If we examine the biographies and literary contributions of those men and women who sought enlightenment, not merely for the gratification of the intellect, but to employ that wisdom for the alleviation of human misery, we shall be arrested by the circumstance that these lives possess numerous commonalities, distinguishing factors that segregate them from the lives of eminent figures of other varieties. Primarily, they usually harbor, from early infancy, an intuition of a specific task they are destined to perform. Eventually, they discover this vocation and never waver in their dedication to it. Thirdly, whether they classify themselves as agnostics or believers, for we seldom discover atheists within their cohorts, they possess a profound sense of communion with an entity superior to themselves, which utilizes them as instruments for the service of their brethren. We also perceive that these individuals, although frequently of fragile constitution, demonstrate an almost superhuman capacity for endurance when in the service of this force, and they invariably attribute their vitality to an origin external to their own being. It is impossible not to be struck by the fact that all these men and women, irrespective of the specific enterprise upon which they have embarked, view existence from an identical vantage point, that of universal sympathy. Moreover, if we scrutinize them closely, we discern that some, though not all, share certain idiosyncrasies of phraseology, indicating their familiarity with a subject possessing a terminology somewhat divergent from the commonplace. Furthermore, although this subject is never explicitly cited, its lexicon has influenced their literary style and unconsciously permeates their writings. We perceive, therefore, that these laborers for humanity possessed, without exception, a community of character, and that certain among them must also have shared a community of study. We observe further that, individually and collectively, they are no longer satisfied to be carried along by the lethargic tide of natural evolution, but have commenced to swim. Self-consciousness has transcended the blind impulse toward external objectives, and they dimly intuit their destination, much as it is purported that a parched steed senses the presence of water from a great distance. Finally, we observe that a response arrives from that distance, and some power, of which material science takes no cognizance, appears to cooperate with their endeavors, guiding them in moments of uncertainty and sustaining them through tribulations. The history of these individuals lends substance to the assertion that this contact with a force superior to themselves is no figment of an overwrought imagination, for they accomplished what men have rarely accomplished, and with frail physiques endured burdens that would have sufficed to shatter the strongest constitutions. What, then, is this power that great souls encounter? Esoteric tradition affirms that they undergo initiation of one variety or another, for there exist two categories, physical and non-physical, which are customarily undertaken in conjunction, though occasionally only one and not the other is experienced. The physical initiation grants admission to the study of the esoteric wisdom accumulated by generations of men who probed beneath the surface of existence, who sought the interior significance of things rather than their exterior forms. It admits the student to the fellowship and confidence of these sages, disposing them to share their erudition and to accept the initiate as a collaborator or disciple. The second form of initiation is declared to be a spiritual experience, wherein the soul establishes contact with higher powers and is admitted to the fraternity of great souls upon the inner planes. Regarding these two forms of initiation, at times one precedes and at times the other. Occasionally the physical, the lesser initiation, occurs earlier, and the student is subsequently instructed on how to prepare himself for the spiritual experience. In other instances, it is the spiritual initiation that arrives first, and the student is shortly thereafter placed upon the path to undertaking the physical initiation should he so desire. Yet, esotericists universally agree that, although individuals may not necessarily undergo both initiations, the one invariably carries within it the opportunity for the other. We may ask ourselves, how does it come to pass that any individual should step out from the general march of evolution? We observe, in the first instance, that it is exclusively men of advanced character who take this step. What precipitates this abnormal development of character? Esoteric science possesses its traditional elucidation for this problem as well. It commences by premising that the evolution in which we find ourselves participating is not unique, but was preceded by other evolutions and will be succeeded by yet others. It also declares that evolution is not a blind, mechanical, material process, explicable in terms of physics and chemistry, but is essentially a mental process, a manifestation, the embodiment in concrete form of an idea held within the divine mind. Esoteric science further declares that the subjects of this evolution are capable of bearing a part and aiding in the labor, For the moment we become conscious of an idea that the divine mind is expressing, we ourselves are expressing it. We have accorded it a concrete form and embodied it within our lives, and thus have ourselves assumed the work of evolution. We are consciously cooperating with God. Indeed, it is seldom that anyone who has achieved the realization of the greater purpose remains passive. This magnificent idea fructifies within him so vigorously that he is compelled to colonize mentally, just as a vigorous nation colonizes physically. We undergo spiritual initiation when we become conscious of the divine within us, and thereby contact the divine without us. It is a well-established principle that like attracts like, and that sooner or later we tend to drift into the society of our peers. This is especially true of those who have contacted the divine. The great mental currents which circulate through the cosmos, much like the invisible magnetic currents playing about the earth, bear the individual to his appropriate station. This explains why esoteric science never ventures forth to seek its pupils. It understands that its pupils will come to it. We never observe the occult lodges advertised upon the hoardings, yet we distinctly perceive the onset of a current in the minds of men. What are the methods whereby a man reaches the juncture when he is mature for this profound spiritual experience? We have observed that it is a particular type of character that undertakes initiation. How, then, is that character acquired? Esoteric science provides the elucidation via the doctrine of reincarnation. The theory positing that the immortal soul assumes a multitude of corporeal forms, gathering experience and character development within each, discarding the vessel once its utility is exhausted, and assuming a new one for subsequent labors. Esoteric science invariably conceptualizes existence in terms of evolution, whereas the layperson thinks merely in terms of an incarnation, a solitary life. This divergence in perspective fundamentally shapes their respective attitudes toward existence. To the latter, death signifies the absolute cessation of all things, while to the former, it represents merely the conclusion of a specific phase. To the one, it is a cataclysm, to the other, a sunset. If, throughout the lengthy eons of evolution, a soul demonstrates an educability and capacity to profit from experiential fruits superior to that of its contemporaries, those great intelligences, the products of earlier evolutionary cycles who consciously cooperate with the divine mind to concretize the abstract concept of good, much as we do upon becoming self-conscious of the divine, select that individual from the generality of his peers to bestow upon him special tuition. This is done not for his personal aggrandizement, but because they perceive in him a prospective co-worker. The greater the number of these co-workers with the divine available to leaven the inert mass of evolving life, the more rapid and seamless the progress of evolution shall be. Esoteric tradition asserts that as soon as a mind is sufficiently advanced to comprehend its significance, it is apprised of the esoteric theory of evolution, so that, cognizant of the grand design, it may effectively cooperate with the labor. Yet, long before the individual is ripe for the conscious realization of this monumental task, his mind undergoes schooling and preparatory conditioning. This training persists across several incarnations before the realization of the process to which he is submitted penetrates his waking consciousness, prompting the individual to undertake the work on his own account. If the record of such an individual's past lives is recovered through specific methods known to esoteric science, the training process becomes palpably evident. These lives exhibit a distinct category of experience. Their trajectory is far more adventurous than that of their contemporaries, with a multitude of exploits compressed into a few brief existences. Their training is markedly more arduous. Yet, commensurate with the heavier burden, there is also greater strength. Life after life, this concentration of experience proceeds until the individual is finally brought into contact with the prospect of physical initiation, usually of a minor degree, yet placing him in a position that serves as a foundational point of opportunity. Upon reviewing these records, one is struck by the fact that the individual frequently becomes attached to a temple or another center of esoteric knowledge in a menial capacity, as a cleaner, a craftsman, or one employed in the routine logistics of the ritual. The inner teaching appears never to be imparted upon the occasion of the first contact with esotericism. Rather, the ritual, the outer form, is the primary element with which we become acquainted. However, sufficient matter is glimpsed to arouse curiosity, and if a mind can once be stimulated to formulate a query, it demonstrates its readiness for the answer. If we trace the historical record of this individual, we observe him advancing and receding like the waves of the sea, contingent upon the utilization of opportunities. Yet, if he is destined to succeed and become one of the greater initiates, he advances steadily through all setbacks, as does the tide, working his way gradually into deeper knowledge. In incarnation after incarnation, he accepts initiation into the mysteries of his specific era and race, utilizing the experiences garnered in each life as the point of departure for the subsequent one. It is compelling to note that what is acquired is never forfeited. Capacity remains notwithstanding the disappearance of memory, for that which has been learned is archived within the subconscious mind and contributes to the formation of character. In each life, we rapidly recapitulate the progress achieved in previous existences until we arrive at the precise point where we ceased. Thereupon, we commence the laborious process of acquiring the new. This fact accounts for the rapid advancement exhibited by some, while others toil slowly upward. Yet, let it be remembered that the segment of the path over which we so painfully struggle today, we shall rapidly recapitulate when the tomorrow of a new incarnation dawns. Let us now consider what transpires in our present existence if we have traversed this path in the past. To commence, we recapitulate. As soon as we begin to think independently, we arrive at the mental state we occupied at the cessation of the previous life. Although we do not yet possess the actual data upon which to base our opinions, we find our minds possessed by certain foregone conclusions. To those who do not view matters from our perspective, these appear to be baseless prejudices. Yet they are so integral to our deeper selves that no evidence or argument serves to dislodge them. We simply know, in the same manner that we know we possess hands and feet, because this knowledge has been ingrained in us by centuries of experience, and the pressure of a single lifetime is insufficient to force us from these deeply scored furrows. Thus it is that a man may traverse life finding neither sympathy nor support for his views, yet remain unshaken. Nevertheless, sooner or later, though it may not occur until the moment of death, he will be drawn into the company of his peers. These ideas appear to be inherent in the mind, so early are they recovered. Moreover, every fragment of information bearing upon the subject adheres to the memory as if endowed with a peculiar fascination of its own. We all, no doubt, recall reading numerous novels, the memory of whose plots has completely dissipated, and yet some chance reference to the mysteries has persisted in the mind. All studies of this nature come easily to the student, for in reality, he is not learning anew but revising. He is not introducing ideas into his mind for the first time, but recalling to consciousness that which lies dormant within the subconscious. It appears as though much of our subconscious mind persists from incarnation to incarnation. It is the conscious mind alone that we reconstruct with each life. The student will often recover from his subconsciousness numerous memories of things learned in the past, and he may be inclined to regard these as revelations, so foreign are they to his normal consciousness. It is unlikely, however, that the student at this stage of his career would be reading from the Akashic records. He is much more likely to be exploring the depths of his own subconscious mind, the wealth of which is far greater than he suspected. This tapping of the subconsciousness may be mistaken by the student for external aid and teaching. Yet, because this error is common, it must not be assumed that such aid is never available. Indeed, it is ever present, and its accessibility depends solely upon our power to avail ourselves of it. External aid invariably comes to the student who has advanced sufficiently to benefit from it, and many will relate how apparent chance played into their hands so repeatedly that they could no longer regard it as motiveless. It must be remembered, however, in this connection, that the power of the mind over circumstances is profound, and we must not commit the error of looking without until we have thoroughly looked within. We can, moreover, do much to manifest that which we desire by realizing the power of the mind. The potency of a clearly formulated and long-sustained aspiration is difficult to overrate. Thus, the earnest desire goes forth in search of the master, and it has not far to seek. If the student is worthy, he will presently be rewarded either by the inner knowledge that he has achieved this mental contact, or he will discover that chance has placed him in touch with a source of occult information and training, and his conscious work has commenced. The gate is open. It is for him to tread the path. Chapter 3. The Dawning of Inner Light. Since the primary objective of initiation is to effect the illumination of the soul through the agency of the inner light, it is incumbent upon us, prior to examining the optimal methods of preparation for this enterprise, to elucidate the precise definition of initiation, given the prevalence of diverse interpretations currently in circulation. Within the context of this treatise, the term initiate denotes an individual in whom the higher self, the individuality, has coalesced with the personality and has substantially entered into incarnation within the physical vessel. Consequently, an initiate is one through whose eyes the higher self gazes out upon the world. The personality is thereby reduced to a collection of habit complexes essential for existence, permitting the higher self to execute its labors with minimal distraction arising from the physical plane. This great initiation is invariably undergone whilst separate from the physical body. No ritualistic ceremony confers it. Nevertheless, ritual may be, and within the Western Hemisphere customarily is, employed to discipline the consciousness in preparation for this transcendent experience. Furthermore, it is experienced in a state of full consciousness, and the memory thereof is preserved intact. We are frequently queried as to whether one may undergo initiation without being cognizant of the event. To this inquiry we offer an emphatic negation. Prima facie, it is preposterous to suppose that one could remain oblivious to receiving a permanent expansion of consciousness. It frequently transpires, however, that a master may accept an aspirant as a pupil without that individual's immediate awareness, owing to the undeveloped condition of their psychic faculties. Realization dawns only after the training has advanced to a specific degree. In such an instance, a psychic might inform the individual that they have indeed found acceptance as a pupil of the Great White Brotherhood and have set foot upon the path leading to initiation. Yet, they would be in error to assert that the individual has been initiated. Upon acceptance, the sigil of the master is impressed upon the pupil's aura, shining forth to clairvoyant vision as a disc approximately 6 inches in diameter situated immediately above the head, colored in accordance with the ray upon which the master operates. When the pupil is entrusted with a task to perform on behalf of the master upon the mundane plane, the corresponding band of color within the aura illuminates, demonstrating that the master's power is functioning through the pupil. However, it is not until the aura is illuminated in its entirety that a man becomes an initiate in the sense the term is employed herein. This phenomenon occurs only when he radiates his own light, rather than the borrowed luminescence of his master. Thus, initiation may justly be described as the dawning of the inner light, or the manifestation upon the physical plane of the ogoids, or body of light. The moon may be posited as a representation of the personality, waxing and waning through innumerable incarnatory phases involving the reflection of solar light or its obscuration by the earth's shadow. Conversely, the higher self, the immortal spirit within man, is accurately symbolized by the sun, which shines perpetually in the heavens, regardless of its visibility to our eyes. These glyphs will amply repay deep meditation. The higher self enters into manifestation within the physical body at the moment initiation occurs. One need only contemplate the vast disparity between the individuality and the personality in the average human to comprehend the immense magnitude of preparation required before such a manifestation becomes possible. Moreover, it is undeniable that were this manifestation attempted prior to the completion of due preparation, the incoming self would encounter such a profound discordance between itself and its vesture that, akin to an ill-fitting garment, the vesture would be rent asunder by the mere attempt to don it. This phenomenon is occasionally observed among occultists and accounts for many of the tribulations affecting occult fraternities. Before the higher self can manifest through cerebral consciousness, the personality must be attuned to the precise key of the individuality. The individuality maintains its existence within the spiritual spheres, just as the personality sustains its existence within the mundane sphere. The actions of the former are determined by its aspiration to preserve harmony with the divine life of the cosmos, from which it derives its being, whilst the actions of the personality are determined by its desire to maintain harmony with the material world, from which the life of the body draws its sustenance. It is, therefore, evident that the personality must entirely reorient its standpoint before it can align itself with the higher self. We must be prepared to shift the very foundation of our motives if we desire to receive initiation. This necessitates a singleness of purpose that balks at no sacrifice. "Sell all that thou hast, and follow me," commanded the Master, and again, "Let the dead bury their dead. Follow thou me." These are arduous dictums, yet experience authenticates their veracity. There exists no compulsion for anyone to present themselves as a candidate for initiation, for the goal of divine union may be achieved via the circuitous path of evolution. Conversely, however, they must not assert that the ancient secrets have been lost simply because they, unwilling to pay the requisite price, have failed to receive the great pearl. The personality and the allurements of the senses must be sacrificed so that the higher self may manifest. Upon this point, there can be no dispute. All initiates have unanimously declared this to be the case. We are inclined to suppose that, having sacrificed the personality, we shall be bereft of all possessions. This error arises because the Western mind still clings to the habit of believing that the death of the body terminates existence. Thus, we believe subconsciously that the death of the personality terminates the enjoyment of the fullness of life. We forget that the merchant who sold all he possessed was thereby enabled to purchase the great pearl. True, he had liquidated all his assets, yet they were reinvested in an object of infinitely greater value. The gospel narrative implies that he bore away the pearl in triumph. Such is the case with us if we make the sacrifice of sensory attachments, thereby permitting the incarnation of the higher self within the physical body. A period of struggle ensues as the threads binding us to sensory desires are severed. However, as soon as an appreciable clearance has been effected, the higher light begins to dawn. We are not left comfortless for long. Halts by me that footfall. Is my gloom, after all, shade of his hand, outstretched caressingly? Whilst consciousness remains focused within the personality, we cannot contact realities directly, but may only perceive their reflections within the world of form. The call of the higher life is to arise, to turn away from the mirror of form consciousness, and to gaze directly at reality, which is life, not form. It is this act of turning that constitutes the soul's primary task when it seeks initiation. As the personality is gradually brought into subjection to the higher self, the inner light begins to irradiate it. A sudden burst of illumination is rare, often proving blinding and disabling, as St. Paul discovered upon the road to Damascus. Therefore, it is permitted only in the case of highly advanced souls who have been trained to a superlative degree in previous lives and have reincarnated with this specific end in view, constructing their personalities accordingly. For the remainder of those seeking initiation, the inner light dawns gently and gradually, often obscured by cloud shadows as the desires of the senses surge upward repeatedly, even after they were believed to have been vanquished. Having achieved this freedom from the bondage of the senses, two paths subsequently lie open to the initiate. He may pursue the mystic path and proceed toward liberation, or he may follow the occult path and return to the world of men, equipped with the powers of the higher mind. It will be noted that mysticism does not teach reincarnation, whereas occultism does. And it is for this reason that the mystic aspires to escape from the bondage of the flesh, never to return, whereas the occultist designs to return to matter, bearing with him the fruits of his labors. Both aspirations represent legitimate and justifiable ideals. The mystic who proceeds to claim his liberty does not cease to be an influence in the world. Through his attainments, he expiates a portion of the global karma. It is for this reason that mystics invariably engage in mortification long after all personal carnal desires have been purged. They are abreacting the collective karma of the world. The occultist, conversely, engages in only such mortification of the flesh as is requisite to subjugate it, instructing it to obey the sovereign will without complaint. His objective is to construct for himself a personality of such caliber that his higher self may function through it without let or hindrance. It must resemble a powerful and spirited steed that responds instantaneously to heel and rein, requiring neither spur nor curb. Its senses do not beguile him, nor do its passions blind him. He utilizes it as a transparent aperture of the soul, one that renders the view without distortion. The mystic renders his personality negative so that he may serve as a conduit for the cosmic forces. Be still and know that I am God constitutes his attitude toward every dilemma he is called upon to resolve. He achieves stillness upon the mundane plane, permitting spiritual powers to discover a channel into the group mind through his meditations. The occultist, in contrast, occupies himself with forms, employing his concrete mind to mold those forms into vessels for the cosmic forces. The mystic operates exclusively within the higher self. The occultist precipitates the higher self into manifestation upon the planes of form. The mystic, having attained liberation from the thraldom of the senses, remains content with the experiences of inner consciousness, seeking not to manifest them upon the earthly plane. Conversely, the occultist, having achieved the same realization desired by the mystic, endeavors to reflect upon the plane of form, that state of consciousness to which he has ascended. He undertakes this task, providing he is a brother of the right-hand path, because it is requisite for the great plan that specific ideals be actualized in the world of form, yet he never does so for sensory gratification. This constitutes the trial by which our Lord was tested in the wilderness. Command these stones that they be made bread. He was both occultist and mystic, as evinced by such miracles as the transmutation of water into wine and the passage through sealed doors. However, he never employed his occult powers save in the service of his mission, and it is noteworthy that, as he advanced toward his final achievement, he utilized them with decreasing frequency. The vast majority of liberated souls elect to pursue the mystic path, thereby transcending our earth sphere. Indeed, only a select few of those who have secured their freedom choose to sacrifice it by returning to the world of form, for they possess no sensory desires to draw them back into incarnation. To them, it is rather an incarceration. They are motivated solely by a desire to alleviate the burden of the world's confusion. Conversely, it must not be presumed that the mystic abandons the world when he forsakes it. His prayers remain ever with it, and it is this great assembly of praying souls that alleviates the burden of the world's karma upon the inner planes. The mystic serves in one capacity, and the occultist in another. Both are essential to the cosmic undertaking of regeneration and evolution. There can be no function save through duality, the interaction of the positive and negative aspects of a singular force. The mystic stands at one pole of the Christ force, and the occultist at the other. Obeying the well-known occult law of the alternation of polarity upon the planes, the mystic is negative on the planes of form and positive upon the planes of force. Conversely, the occultist is positive upon the planes of form and negative upon the planes of force. Consequently, the latter must always invoke forces to aid him in his endeavors, employing for this purpose ritual magic in its various types, ranging from a simple invocation made with a sign to the elaborate ceremonies performed in lodges. The truest development, and that aimed at by the disciplines administered in the Society of the Inner Light, is achieved through a precise balance of the positive and negative forces of the soul held in equilibrium by the will, such that the judgment may incline the scale in either direction. Therefore, within the lesser mysteries, the soul naturally inclined toward mysticism is invariably provided with occult training, whilst the soul naturally inclined toward occultism is compelled to work upon mystic lines. It is not until the greater mysteries are attained that the soul is permitted to pursue its natural inclination and receive the training specifically adapted to its capacities. The rationale for this apparent violence to nature will be readily discerned. If a soul already inclined toward mysticism is developed solely along mystical lines, it is prone to acquire that painful lack of balance so frequently observed among those who dwell extensively in the unseen. Its grasp upon the planes of form does not keep pace with its contact with the planes of force. Consequently, the forces breach the boundaries of form and are diffused into a quagmire of emotional spirituality, lost and squandered like the waters of a river that has burst its banks and transformed the valley into a marshland. That marsh may produce lush vegetation, yet it is neither land nor water, and it is useless for all practical purposes of human service. The occultist, conversely, if permitted at the outset of his training to indulge his predilection for form and intellectualization, will become immured within his forms, losing the living contacts which alone impart vitality to the symbols of occultism. If, however, he is assigned as his discipline the task of contacting forces by purely intuitional and meditative methods, he will acquire the capacity to establish his contacts independently of formulae and ritual magic. Subsequently, when at a more advanced stage of his training he is instructed in the traditional methods of the occult arts, he will channel infinitely more power than the initiate who has not been so disciplined. It is vital to all occult training that the student comprehend the principles of occultism, rather than employing his formulae blindly and superstitiously. A chain is no stronger than its weakest link. Neither mystic nor occultist shall be capable of bringing through into the plane of manifestation more than they are able to polarize within their own natures. Chapter 4. Domestic Duty as Spiritual Path. Too many. The initial cognizance of the existence of the way of initiation and the masters who summon chosen souls to their service arrives as a revelation and a clarion call. No arguments are requisite to convince them. Their entire soul surges in response. The sacrifices and disciplines of the path hold no dread for them. They supplicate solely for opportunity. Yet, in a multitude of instances, these souls are not at liberty to seize the proffered opportunity, for they are fettered by the chains of duty or circumstance. Unless they are prepared to disregard the rights and welfare of others, they cannot embark upon the path. Is it to be deemed virtuous to sacrifice others to the service of the masters? Which constitutes the superior obligation, the service of the masters or the service of the family and the domestic sphere? This is a momentous interrogation, one that is perpetually recurring, and its resolution is not as facile as some would have us believe. When a soul thus spontaneously responds to the call of the path, it is manifest that it is not perceiving it for the first time. In prior incarnations, it has penetrated the veil of the temple, and the memory remains latent within the subconscious mind. This being the case, why is it that when the summons arrives in this existence, the soul is not at liberty to pursue it without violating faith and abrogating sacred bonds? It is to the law of karma that we must look for a resolution to this query. There must exist some element within the karma that requires expiation before that soul is prepared for the path, and the bonds of obligation are imposed upon it so that they may serve as its discipline. The route which such a soul is destined to traverse is known as the path of the hearth fire, and it is as authentic a mode of initiation as any of the disciplines imposed by the occult fraternities. Neither is it a more accelerated nor a more retarded method of initiation than any other. A builder may expend considerable time accumulating the materials for the edifice he intends to construct. He may fashion those materials section by section, devoting days and weeks to the labor, and yet no wall begins to ascend. Then, after much meticulous and precise exertion, he arrives at the juncture where he is prepared to assemble the components he has so laboriously fabricated, and in a few hours the perfectly matched sections are bolted together and the structure is erected. Thus it is with the preparation for initiation. The candidate may devote long years to preliminary training, disciplining mind and body, assimilating all the lessons of life, relinquishing his grasp on the desires and illusions of matter, and patiently awaiting the coveted admission to the mysteries. And then, after the protracted and arduous task has been fulfilled, and he arrives, perhaps in the twilight of his existence, at the opportunity so long foregone, he will discover that the weary years of the patient endurance of burdens have transported his consciousness through many degrees of discipline and initiation, and that when he approaches the mysteries, he will pass rapidly through the outer court and find himself admitted to the temple. If life has imparted to him the lessons of occult discipline, the lesser initiator has no need to instruct him, but, having tested him to verify his experience, attests for him to the great initiator. A certain stage of experience must be attained before we are prepared for initiation. The bonds of the senses must have commenced to loosen spontaneously before we are ready for the great renunciation of a personal sense of existence. There are three initiators who conduct us to the altar of the mysteries. The great initiator, who is the master, the lesser initiator. Do you want access to this and all the complete audiobooks on the channel, plus the ebook version? Click the link in the description or scan the QR code in the left corner of the screen to access our library, where you can listen to your favorite esoteric books without ad interruptions, lock your screen, or use other apps while the narration plays, and even download the ebook version to follow along as you listen. Listen on your computer via web browser, or download the app from the Play Store. After subscribing, you will receive an email with your login details, password, and step-by-step instructions on how to access the books through the Hotmart app.